continue in our book reading, The Biography of William Tyndale by Henry Walter, and this is the complete works, William Tyndale, first published in 1848. This is part 2. We have just seen Rinke declaring that if he had not bribed the magistrates of Frankfurt, and by their means compelled a printer to let him purchase what remained in his hands of Tyndale's work, they would have been sent to purchasers in Scotland as well as in England. And in an earlier letter from Hacket to Cardinal Wolsey, dated from Mechlin, February 20th, 1526 to 1527, he tells them that he had advertised the king's secretary, Mr. Brian Tuck, that there were divers merchants of Scotland that bought many of such like books, in parentheses, and the books he is speaking of are Tyndale's New Testament, and took them into Scotland, a part to Edinburgh, and most part to the town of St. Andrews. For the which cause, says Hacket, when I was at Barrow, being advertised that the Scottish ships were in Zealand, for there the said books were laden, I went suddenly thitherward, thinking, if I had found such stuff there, that I would cause to make as good a fire of them as there has been of the remnant in Bramant. But fortune would not that I should be in time, for the foresaid ships were departed a day before my coming. In March 1528, Bishop Tonsdale had granted to Sir Thomas More a license to have and to use these heretical books, as he was pleased to style them, which being in the English tongue had been imported into the realm, that he might get himself an immortal name and eternal glory in heaven, by exposing the crafty malice of their authors, and that as one able to play the Demosthenes in the English tongue, he might make the prelates more prompt against those wicked supplanters of the church. Thus, eulogized, I can't say that word, eulogized, it's like a eulogy, eulogized, I can't say that word, and summoned into the field by his diocese. More commenced a series of controversial attacks against Tyndale, which he was tempted to continue till they filled several hundred folio pages. Tyndale himself, the meanwhile, was laboring at his translation of the books of Moses from the Hebrew, though he is also supposed to have printed a tract on matrimony about this period, and he is now reputed to be the author of an exposition of 1 Corinthians 7. The printer's colophon, to which is said to end as follows: at Marlborough in the land of Hesse, 1529, 20th day of June, by me, Hans Loft, as the same printer finished an edition of the Revelation of Antichrist for Tyndale's associate Frith on the 12th of the following month. It is probable that they were both still at Marburg in July. By that time, Sir Thomas More, Bishop Tonsdale, and Hacket had taken their place amongst the diplomatists assembled at Cambrai, where the Princess Regent of the Netherlands and the mother of Francis I were met to arrange the term of peace between the French monarch and the Emperor Charles V. I'm going to have to move this so I can see there, in case it goes off. Okay. Our king's envoy were not forgetting Tyndale there. The treaty between the two contending potentates was signed on the 5th of August, and then the Englishmen induced the Princess Regent to consent to a treaty with Henry VIII, by which the two contracting parties, yeah, for real, the two contracting parties bound themselves, among other things, to prohibit the printing or selling any Lutheran books, as they styled every anti-papal publication, within their respective territories. On their way home from Cambrai, the English ministers found in Antwerp a London merchant named Augustine Packington, a favorer of Tyndale, but one who took care to conceal that inclination from the ruling powers. According to the current tale, adopted by Fox and the contemporary chronicler Hall, Bishop Tonsdale talked with his merchant about the New Testament and said how gladly he would buy up all the copies, to which Pennington replied that if his lordship would indeed be responsible for the price, he would himself lay down the necessary sum and would assure him of getting every copy into his hands, as far as they were yet unsold. The tale proceeds to state that the bishop gladly commissioned him so to do, and that Paddington went forthwith to Tyndale, then also in Antwerp, and said to him, William, I know thou art a poor man, and hast a heap of New Testaments and books by thee, for which thou hast both endangered thy friends and beggared thyself. And I have now gotten thee a merchant, which with ready money shall dispatch thee of all that thou hast, if thou think it profitable. The merchant is the Bishop of London. Tyndale is then represented as saying that he was glad of this, as the burning of his testaments would but bring odium on the person who could cast the scriptures into the fire, while the price would relieve his wants and enable him to bring out a more correct edition. And so, upon compact made between them, the Bishop of London had the books, Paddington had the things, and Tyndale had the money. These last are Fox's words, and he presently adds that at a subsequent examination of George Constantine, who was charged with promoting the sale of heretical books, More learnt from him that the Bishop of London's money had been a succour and comfort to more than one of Tyndale's abettors, and that More then remarked, By my truth, I think even the same, for so much I told the bishop before he went about it. Strange as it seems that Tonsdale should have spent money upon a repetition of Archbishop Warham's unwise expedient for the suppression of a publication which the press could speedily reissue, the above account receives confirmation from Hall's Chronicles of the following year, where he tells how the Bishop of London caused all of his New Testaments, which he had bought with many other books, to be burnt openly in St. Paul's courtyard in the month of May. And whereas the date of the treaties of Cambrai proves that the negotiators could not have left that city till some days after the 5th of August, which allows time for Tyndale's removing from Marburg to Antwerp before they could reach the latter city on their way to England. There were contemporary transactions which would doubtless dispose Tyndale to quit Marburg about that time. For in August, the Landgrave of Hesse was urging Luther and Zwingli, I can't say that man's name. Zwingli, I can't say his name. Forgive me, I can't say that man's name. To meet at Marburg for the purpose of discussing their different views of respecting the manner of the presence of Christ in the Lord's Supper. Yeah, that person, Zwingli. Okay, Zwingli, thank you. We shall find Tyndale expressing to Frith at a later date his anxiety not to intermeddle with that controversy unnecessarily. Yes, him. It is as a digression from his narrative of other matters that Fox has given his readers this anecdote, and he makes no reference to it in his subsequent professed account of the life of Tyndale, where indeed not an event is related of what really befell him, from the mention of his first arrival in Germany till we come to the following. At what time Tyndale had translated the 5th book of Moses, called Deuteronomy, minding to print the same at Hamburg, he sailed thitherward, where, by the way, upon the coast of Holland, he suffered shipwreck, by which he lost all his books, writings, and copies, and so was compelled to begin all anew, to his hindrance and doubling of his labors. Thus, having lost by that ship both money, his copies, and his time, he came in another ship to Hamborough, where at his appointment Master Coverdale tarried for him, and helped him in the translating of at his appointment Master Coverdale tarried for him and helped him in the translating of the whole 5 books of Moses, from Easter till December, in the house of a worshipful widow, Mrs. Margaret Van Emerson. 1529, a great sweating sickness being at the time in the town. So having dispatched his business at Hamborough, he returned afterward to Antwerp again. As Fox and Coverdale were contemporary London clergy for nearly 10 years in the reign of Elizabeth, Fox had doubtless heard his account from Coverdale, but with that great liability to a mistake about dates which necessarily attends any recital from memory of things long past. The date assigned to Tyndale's second sojourn to Hamburg should have been 1530. After visiting Antwerp at the close of the summer of 1529, he had returned to Marburg, and on the 17th of January, 1530, Hans Luft completed for him the printing of his translation of Genesis. It was from the press of the same Marburg printer that his polemic treatise entitled The Practice of Prelates came forth shortly after. In the meanwhile, the risk of sending the packages of proscribed books down the Rhine for exportation to England had been greatly increased by the severity of the emperor's edict against the favorers of heresy in any part of his hereditary dominions. It might be expected that this would not prevent Tyndale from endeavoring to send off some copies of his Genesis without delay, and we accordingly find his enemies soon declaring that such had reached England. But in his new difficulty he would naturally remember Hamburg, a seaport where he could have the help of learned Jews in proceeding with the Old Testament, and where Bugenhagen of Pomerania, whose address to the faithful in England was joined in the same prohibitory list with his own works, and recently accepted an invitation to instruct its citizens. There was time enough for his communicating with Coverdale and for the events mentioned by Fox between his quitting Marburg and Easter Sunday, which in 1530 was as late as April 17th. His first work on reaching Hamburg would have been the printing of Deuteronomy, and to retranslate and then print it seems to have been still his first work there. For whereas after a convocation which closed December 24th, 1529, the bishops procured from Henry a proclamation enjoining the chief officers of state and all magistrates to do their part towards bringing to punishment the writers, printers, importers, distributors, and possessors of any book then made, or which should thereafter be made, against the Catholic faith. The list of such books, which was appended to that proclamation a few months later, enumerates amongst them the practice of prelates, Genesis, and Deuteronomy, while the other portions of Tyndale's translation of the Pentateuch did not seem to be noticed in any hostile document before the summer of 1531. But farther, when all the portions of the Pentateuch were put into circulation, there was a striking peculiarity in the typography of the volume. For while the Genesis is in the black letter, Exodus and Leviticus are in the Roman character, but the book of Numbers is again in the same black letter type as the Genesis. And lastly, Deuteronomy is once more in the same Roman character as Exodus. And not one of these portions contain any notice of when, where, or by whom it was printed, except the book of Genesis, at the time of which is the colophon already mentioned as its date. Imprinted at Marlborough in the land of Hesse by me, Hans Loft, the year of our Lord, and its MDXXX, the 17th day of January. The simplest way of accounting for this irregularity leads us to the inference that when Tyndale quitted Marburg with some uncertainty as to whether he should find it expedient to sojourn long in Hamburg, he left behind him copies of Genesis printed there and perhaps numbers still in the press, taking away with him only such books and manuscripts as were to aid him in continuing his work. All he took away with him he lost by the shipwreck. But when settled in Hamburg, he would send for Genesis and Numbers and bind them up along with those other books of the Pentateuch, which he got printed at the Hamburg press. Tyndale's practice of prelates is a continued setting forth of reasons and motives which should induce princes to resume authority over ecclesiastics and to humble the usurping hierarchy. And as Cromwell was now gaining influence with Henry VIII by suggesting means of replenishing the royal treasury, which the prelates must be expected to thwart unless their power were broken down, he would doubtless take care that the king should see this treaty as he had seen and express a momentary approbation of what was said on the same subject in Tyndale's treatise on the obedience. We accordingly find that the king became bent on asserting whether the hope of being permitted to return to England in safety and perhaps with honor might not induce Tyndale to write as he should wish against the Pope's supremacy and on the duty of suppressing monasteries, and to write no more than he should wish on other topics. It is probable that Coverdale, who looked up to Cromwell as a patron, had been directed by that rising statesman to put himself in communication with Tyndale for a similar purpose. And now Mr. Stephen Vaughan, a new envoy to the Princess Regent of the Netherlands, selected by Cromwell, was instructed by the king not to attempt to procure the seizure of Tyndale like his predecessor, but to employ promises of some kind or other to persuade him to throw himself on the king's mercy. Oh, hold on, my head's bleeding. Okay. There we go. On the king's mercy. This appears in Vaughan's letter to the king, dated Barug, January 26, 1530, wherein he says, I have written 3 sundry letters unto Tyndale, and the same sent for the more safety to 3 sundry places, to Frankfurt, Hanborough, and Marlborough. I then, not being assured in which of the same he was. He proceeds to say, I had very good hope that he would, upon the promise of your majesty and of your most gracious safe conduct, be content to repair and come into England. The sentence goes on with such inextricable confusion as sufficiently indicates the embarrassment of the writer in coming to an avowal of a fear likely to offend his willful sovereign, which he at last states as follows: that now the bruit and fame of such things as, since my writing to him, have chanced within your realm, shall provoke the man not only to be minded to the contrary of that whereunto I had thought without difficulty to have easily brought him, but also to suspect my persuasion to be made to be his more peril and danger than, as I think, if he were placed before you, he should ever have need to fear. The things which had chanced within the realm were, doubtless, the arrest of John Tyndale and the heavy fine laid upon him for sending 5 marks to his brother William beyond the sea, and for receiving the keeping with him certain letters from his said brother. It appears from the same letter of Vaughan to the king that he had previously informed Henry of Tyndale's having prepared for the press an answer to Sir Thomas More's dialogue. Vaughan at the same time sent Cromwell a copy of Tyndale's reply to his letter, and says to his patron confidentially, The man is of a greater knowledge than the king's highness doth take him for, which well appeareth by his works. Would God he were in England. 3 months more had not passed away ere this envoy of the King of England had a conversation with Tyndale, who appeared before him as unexpectedly as Elijah showed himself to Obadiah. The account of their interview is given by Vaughan in a letter to the king, in which he says, "The day before the date hereof I spake with Tyndale without the town of Antwerp, and by this means he sent a certain person to seek me, whom he had advised to say that a certain friend of mine, unknown to the messenger, was very desirous to speak with me, praying me to take pains to go unto him to such place as he should bring me. Then I to the messenger, What is your friend, and where is he? His name I know not, said he, but if it be your pleasure to go where he is, I will be glad thither to bring you. Thus, doubtful what this matter meant, I concluded to go with him, and followed him till he brought me without the gates of Antwerp, into a field lying nigh unto the same, where was abiding me this said Tyndale. At our meeting, do you know me? Do you not know me? Said this Tyndale. I do not well remember you, said I to him. My name, said he, is Tyndale. But Tyndale, said I, fortunate be our meeting. Then Tyndale, Sir, I have been exceedingly desirous to speak with you. And I with you, what is your mind? Sir, said he, I am informed that the king's grace taketh great displeasure with me for putting forth of certain books, which I lately made in these parts, but especially for the book named The Practice of the Prelates, whereof I have no little marvel, considering that in it I did but warn his grace of the subtle demeanor of the clergy of his realm towards his person, and of the shameful abusions by them practiced, not a little threatening of the displeasure of his grace and weal of his realm, in which doing I showed and declared the heart of a true subject, which sought the safeguard of his royal person and weal of his commons, to the intent that his grace, thereof warned, might in due time prepare his remedy against their subtle dreams. Oh, hi, Allie. Hey, Allie and Danielle. Okay, here we go. Let me continue because I'll lose my spot. Remedy for the, let's see. See, I lost my spot. I shouldn't have looked the way I did. To the intent that his grace thereof warned might in due time prepare his remedy against the subtle dreams. If it be for my pains therein taken, if for my poverty, if for mine exile out of my natural country, and bitter absent from my friends, if for my hunger, my thirst, my cold, the danger wherewith I am everywhere compassed, and finally, if for innumerable other hard and sharp fightings which I endure, not yet feeling of their asperity. By reason I hoped with my labors to do honor to God, true service to my prince, and pleasure to his commons. How is it that his grace, this considering, may either by himself think, or by the persuasions of others be brought to think, that in this doing I should not shew a pure mind, or true and incorrupt zeal and affection to his grace? Was there in me any such mind when I warned his grace to beware of his cardinal, whose iniquity he shortly after proved according to my writing? Doth this deserve hatred? Again, may his grace, being a Christian prince, be so unkind to God, which hath commanded his word to be spread throughout the world, to give more faith to wicked persuasions of men, which presuming above God's wisdom, and contrary to that which Christ expressly commanded in his testament, dare say that it is not lawful for the people to have the same in a tongue that they understand, because the purity thereof should open men's eyes to see their wickedness? Is there more danger in the king's subjects than in the subjects of all other princes, which in every of their tongues have the same underprivilege of their sufferance? As I now am, very death were more pleasant to me than life, considering man's nature to be such as can bear no truth. Thus, after a long conversation had between us, for my part making answer as my wit would serve me, which were too long to write, I essayed him with gentle persuasions to know whether he would come into England, asserting him that means should be made, if he thereto were minded, without his peril or danger, that he might so do, and that what surety he would devise for the same purpose, should by labor of friends be obtained of your majesty. But to this he answered, that he neither would nor durst come into England, albeit your grace would promise him never so much surety, fearing lest, as he hath before written, your promise made should shortly be broken by the persuasion of the clergy, which would affirm that promises made with heretics ought not to be kept. After this, he told me how he had finished a work against my Lord's Chancellor's book, and would not put it in print till such time as your grace had seen it, because he appreciates, oh no, what's that word? Perceiveth your displeasure towards him for hasty putting forth of his other work, and because it should appear that he is not of so obstinate mind as he thinks he is reported to your grace. This is the substance of his communication had with me, which as he spake, I have written to your grace word for word, as near as I could by any possible means bring to remembrance. My trust, therefore, is that your grace will not but take my labors in the best part I thought necessary to be written unto your grace. After these words, he then, being something fearful of me, lest I would have pursued him, and drawing also towards night, he took his leave of me, and departed from the town, and I toward the town, saying, I should shortly peradventure see him again, or if not, hear from him. Howbeit, I suppose he afterward returned to the town by another way, for there is no likelihood that he should lodge without the town. Hasty to pursue him, I was not, because I was in some likelihood to speak shortly again with him, and in pursuing him I might perchance have failed of my purpose, and put myself in danger. To declare to your majesty what, in my poor judgment, I think of the man, I assert in your grace, I have not communed with a man, and then it has like blank. What followed has been torn off, but Secretary Cromwell's reply will show that the opinion which Vaughan was evidently about to commence stating of Tyndale's character and attainments was so favorable as to rouse the king's anger, so that it would seem as if, while he thought it desirable to preserve the rest of the letter for his minister's inspection and guidance in replying, the impatient monarch had hastily rent away that honest verdict in favor of the man whose work he had publicly styled detestable, which told his conscience that he had been an iniquitous judge. The reply alluded to began as follows. Stephen Vaughan, I commend me unto you, and have received your letters dated at Antwerp the 18th day of April, with also that part of Tyndale's book enclosed in leather, which ye with your letters directed to the King's Highness, after the receipt whereof I did repair unto the court, and there presented the same unto his royal majesty, who made me answer for that time, that his highness at opportune leisure should read the contents as well of your letters as also the said book. And at my next repair thither, it pleased his highness to call for me, declaring unto me as well the contents of your letters, as also much matter contained in the said book of Tyndale. Here this document becomes peculiarly interesting, for the king would seem to have been so dissatisfied with that portion of it which was to appear to express the writer's opinion of Tyndale, that Cromwell found it necessary either to prefer or to admit litigated substitutions for what had been written, which make the letter a decisive evidence of the perils Tyndale was exposing himself to by his faithfulness. The power of the unflinching boldness with which he had rebuked More's advocacy of opinions held as obstinately by the king as by his chancellor, had doubtless added to the anger which Tyndale's calm objections to the repudiation of Catherine must have been roused in Henry's breast. And that anger may be distinctly traced in several of those interlineations by comparing them with the language for which they were substituted in what follows of this dispatch, which shall be given in its old headless spelling. Oh, help me. Here we go. Albeit that I might well perceive that his majesty was right well pleased and right acceptable, considered your diligence and pains taken in the writing and sending of the said book, as also in the persuading and exhorting of Tyndale to repair into this realm. Yet his highness nothing liked the said book, being filled with seditious, slanderous lies and fanciful opinions, showing therein neither learning nor truth, and further communing with his grace. I might well mind and conject that he thought that ye bear much affection toward the said Tyndale, whom in his manners and knowledge in worldly things ye undoubtedly in your, I don't know what, it looks like it's lies, maybe? No, liars. In your liars do much allow and commend, whose works being replete with so abominable slanders and lies imagined and only feigned to infect the people, doth declare him both to lake grace, virtue, learning, discretion, and all other good qualities, nothing ills pretending in all his work, but to seduce, dissuade, that ye in such wise by your lies praise set forth and I don't know what that word is at all. Advance him which nothing else pretendeth. Wow, I'll tell you what, that old English will kill you. And so seduction among the people of this realm. The king highness therefore hath commanded me to advertise you that his pleasure that ye should desist and leave any further to persuade or attempt the said Tyndale to come into this realm, alleging that he, perceiving the malicious, perverse, uncharitable, and indolent mind of the said Tyndale, is a man's without hope of reconciliation in him, and is very joyous to have his realm destitute of such a person, then that he should return into the same, there to manifest his errors and seduction opinions, which being out of the realm by his most uncharitable, venomous, and pestilence book, crafty and false persuasions. That's what they're saying about God, the word of God. He hath partly done all ready for his highness right prudently considereth, if he were present, by all likelihood he would shortly, which God defend, do as much as in him were to infect and corrupt the whole realm to the great inquisition. Is that inquisition? And hurt of the commonwealth of the same. Wherefore, Stephen, I heartily pray you, in all your doing, proceeding, and writing to the king's highness, ye do justly, truly and unfeignedly, without dissimulation, shew yourself his true, loving, and obedient subject, bearing no manner of favor, love, or affection to the said Tyndale. Wow. To his work in any man of wise, but utterly to contempt and abhor the same, assuring you that in so doing ye shall not only cause the king's royal majesty, whose goodness at this time is so what's that word, Lord? Benignly, and graciously minded towards you, as by your good diligence and industry to be used to serve his highness, and eschewing and avoiding favor, and allow the said Tyndale his erroneous work and opinions, so to set you forwards, as all your lovers and friends shall have great consolation of the same. And by the contrary doing, ye shall acquire the indignation of God, displeasure of your sovereign Lord, and by the same cause your good friends, which have been ever glad, prone, and ready to bring you into his gracious favors, to lament and sorrow that their suit in that behalf should be frustrate, and not to take effect according to their good intent and purposes. Wow, that was crazy. After a little more to the like effect, Cromwell proceeds to the mention of Frith, and says that the king, hearing tell of his towardsness in good letters and learning, doth much lament that he should apply his learning to the maintaining, bolstering, and advancing the venomous and what's that word, Lord? Pestiferous works, erroneous and seditious opinions of Tyndale, and that Vaughan was to counsel Frith, by the king's desire, to withdraw from Tyndale society and to return to his native country. And lastly, he exhorts Vaughan himself, for his love of God, utterly to forsake, leave, and withdraw his affection from said Tyndale and all his sect. It appears, however, that after using all this language to comply with his sovereign's humor, Mr. Secretary Cromwell ventured to add a clause directly contradicting the king's declared wish that Vaughan should detest from urging Tyndale to return to England. This clause Vaughan took care to introduce into his next letter to the king, that if his acting in accordance with it should irritate his majesty, he might see by those directions his conduct had been governed. The dispatch of which we are now to speak is dated May 20th, 1531. And in it Vaughan says, I don't know. Hold on. That's gotta be a delivery. Dakota, Daisy, come here. Come here. Hey. You can't trick them little things. Hold on 1 minute. Dakota, Daisy, come here. Come here. What are we doing? Yeah, you can't trick them. Yeah? All right. Well, I'm going to end that there, guys, and I'll go pick up a little bit later. They can't help it. They're just dogs. They don't know any better, you know. So keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. You know who's in the book, which is the Word of God. And in that, the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. It looks like that I will be finishing up on that little excerpt there in this book. And then after that, I will pick up and begin to read William Tyndale's little letters and things that he wrote throughout, which is pretty neat. That's going to be pretty awesome, I think. And then I already did the prologue. So anyway, next time. I love you all. Bye-bye. Hey, guys.